Hi, my name is Anita Nowak, and I'm the author of this book. Welcome to Season 11 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Dr. Nicole Price, who is the Forbes Books author of Spark the Heart, Engineering Empathy in Your Organization. And I would hold up a copy of myself right now, but my copy has not arrived in the mail yet because the publication date is a few weeks out, but she has her copy. So Dr. Price, would you mind sharing the beautiful cover of this book? We're going to have details in the link below so you can order your copy too. Nicole is also the CEO of Lively Paradox, a professional coaching business that focuses on practicing empathy in leadership. By using a compassionate and human-based approach, Dr. Price and her team help leaders and their teams foster success while maintaining a healthy workplace culture. Originally trained as an engineer, Dr. Price's technical background enhances her approach to solving process problems and helping people focus on solutions. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you for having me, Anita. I appreciate you.
Beautiful. So in our little exchange pre-convo, you wrote something that really caught my attention, which is that empathy can be learned, and we need more people to have learned the skill to teach it to others and join the empathy revolution. I just so love that frame. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, absolutely. I am not naturally empathetic. And I think today sometimes people are surprised to know that because I don't know. I think I've been practicing long enough now that sometimes you can't tell. But I have a colleague who was incredibly patient with me. And he doesn't even like the term when I say patient, because he's like, patience has an end date. People will run out of patience. But he just fully believed from the moment he met me that there was something in there that he could work with. And he would give me these exercises that I didn't know were empathy exercises, but they were. And I have since learned to be a more empathetic human, and it's been to my benefit. I know it helps other people, but it has been to my benefit. And so one of the most astonishing things to me when I meet people who are naturally empathetic is that often they're coming to me to tell me a story about a group of people that they just can't believe, how they're behaving. And the engineer in me goes, oh, how interesting that they don't acknowledge that they're not being empathetic with the people they're talking about. And so what I am on a mission to do, and I hope to be able to connect with more people like you, and that is to just help people understand that just a little spark of empathy can help to ignite empathy throughout our individual countries and ultimately our world.
I'm totally in the simpatico about that. We need it. We need it. The world needs more empathy. We need it in our relationships, in our organizations. Hallelujah. Okay, so you believe that there are actually two ways to become more empathic. And what are they, in your opinion?
Yeah, so the hard way and the easy way. That's how I so I described first the easy way, and that's with my colleague who was being really patient with me. But the other way is what I call the hard way. It's nothing like having a friend commit suicide to help open your mind to the kinds of things that people might be going through that makes ending their life easier than whatever they might be going through. But it has to be someone close to you sometimes for some people to get that. There's nothing like getting a test result back from the doctor that says, hey, we found something, and yes, it is cancer, to cause you to say, oh, maybe we should think differently about how we handle healthcare in various parts of the world. There's nothing like losing your job and not having a family support system to then open your eyes to how close some people really are to being without a home. And I call that the hard way, that you need these experiences. You need to actually walk in the shoes of another in order to be understanding of what their experiences are like. But then the easy way is, why do I have to wait for that? Why can't I listen to you explain to me what your experience is like when your friend died from suicide? Why can't I listen to you explain to me what your experience is like when you got a test result that was positive? Or explain to me what it's like to be on the brink of homelessness. And then I recognize that if that's not my experience, that I assume that your experience is valid and that I have things to learn from that. And through that empathetic, at least even if just cognitive, that I might make more empathetic decisions. And I think we can teach people to do that more often. And because we're not slowing down, because we're not being intentional, we just go to logic and reason and whatever we've experienced. And I think the universe has a beautiful way of helping us learn it pleasantly or painfully. And I'm just trying to get people to choose pleasantly.
So, what are some of the ways that people can learn to do that perspective taking, take that imaginary leap of faith, cognitive empathy, as you call it? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I think about, let's say, let's choose the one about cancer as an example. Let's say you've never experienced it, but you have a very firm opinion about how healthcare should be, and maybe you fired somebody when they were out of FM long-term disability or whatever. What if you just went to a facility where people were getting chemo treatments? What if you just went to a walk that was designed for bladder cancer or breast cancer or skin cancer and listened to the stories? What if you're going to have an opinion about it, what if you just did that? And that level of information is helpful to us. What if you read a book like where someone is talking about their cancer experience, even if fictional, so that you can really walk through the world with that person? And I call those empathy walks. And I think if more of us decided, at least on those things that we have really firm beliefs about, that we actually engage in empathy walks and see what happens to the way we think about things.
I love that. Empathy walks. Step into the shoes of someone else. And that's what you were saying in the pre-call, right? That fiction is so helpful to do. I wonder, you sound like a psychologist, like a humanitarian, like a social worker, but you're actually an engineering by training. I'm curious to know what the backstory is and what the bridge is to the work that you're doing now. Is there a thread, or what called you to this?
Being an engineer by training, we are actually taught not to be empathetic. So not overtly, nobody says, don't be empathetic. That's not how it happens. But if you're learning how to operationalize a process, if I've got to get 50,000 parts out at the end of the day, Anita, I can't stop my production line because you have a personal issue. I've got to be able to plug and play. If you can't be there, I got to be able to put another person in your spot to pick up where you left off, like without fail. And so that training causes you to start to think of data over people, policy and process over people, because you got to get 50,000 widgets out at the end of the day. And no one's leader, and I'm speaking in really strong generalizations, is asking them, how empathetic were you to your people today? Most leadership questions are around three things: cost, quality, and service. Are you delivering on the things I paid you for? And it is not a lens towards people. But at the end of the day, how do you get lower cost? How do you get better quality? How do you get better service? It's through being empathetic to people. And I got there, my first real experience with incredible amounts of heartbreak that caused me to open my mind up was the death of my mother. I was at work when I got the call that she died. And I was a high-performing employee with 5 weeks of vacation. And the bereavement policy is like 3 days. But my family situation was slightly different in that my mother had been killed by a drunk driver. And so we were, yes, dealing with the affairs that everybody else has to deal with. But on top of that, we were victims in a murder trial. And that it drug on for years. And so I am going to work, going to court, giving victim impact statements, going to work. It was just a lot going on. And I remember the day, my boss, who I actually think is a pretty empathetic person, she came and she sat down across from me. And this is early, where I'm still kind of on the verge of tears. And you've had incredible loss, so you know what this is like, when you're just kind of walking around in the world and just grief is like so palpable, you can feel it. And she says, "Oh, how are you feeling?" Right? And then I answer, and then she's like, "Okay, so cost, quality, service." I mean, and I remember vividly feeling like she doesn't care one bit about what I am going through, and neither do any of these people. And I ended up leaving within the year. And it's not that I fault them, because I don't. I needed that experience in order to get to this place where I am right now. But if nothing, I also remember when her mom died. It was in like the last 2 years. And I remember thinking, she had no idea what I was going through in that moment, because she has just had her experience. And that's really what helped me kind of shift from this logical, reasonable decision-making approach to something that it's still logical and reasonable, but it absolutely has a foundation of empathy and compassion tied to it.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Oh, it's been years now. I feel like the grief is something that I can live with, like, which I think you also know, like days go by and I don't even think about it in a negative way necessarily. But at that time, I had just used all my vacation to be able to like get myself to a point where I could even just shower every day. And so when you go back to work, I just wasn't ready. And I don't know what that means organizations should do, but I know what I think it means organizations shouldn't do. And to me, that is, people who are grieving are probably going to be unsafe. They're probably going to make errors. They're probably not going to give you their best work. So what would it look like to let people just kind of come back to work when they're fit to work? And some people don't need any time off when they have these kind of losses, but other people need a little more time. And what might that look like if we just sat down with some really smart people and tried to think it through? But we don't.
You know what? I'm listening to you. Okay, you're talking about grief in particular, but Catherine Manning has written a book called The Empathetic Workplace. She's worked with people who have suffered like mass trauma in different circumstances, shootings and bombings and circumstances like that. And she says that if you look at the general workforce, if you're working with people, you're working with people in trauma. And it shows up in all sorts of different ways. Everybody's carrying their own burdens. And so I feel like the skill of empathic leadership in order to actually be competent and empathic, so empathically competent in moments where somebody comes to see you with something important, is a skill that all leaders need to develop. Wouldn't you say?
I say yes. And if they don't feel it first, because it might be likely that you don't, we can start with cognitive empathy. We can start with the brain and thinking about, what would I want to happen if it were me? What do I believe they might be feeling? But you have to take that time to think about what that might be like. And some people can't do it. So I just say, okay, do you know what it's like to be sad? And if you were sad in this moment, how would you want me to interact with you? Even if people could take just that little step, I think we could improve our workplaces. And we know that innovation goes up. We know quality gets better. We know service gets better when we have empathetic workplaces. And my biggest request is that for people who are empathetic already, that they demonstrate empathy to everyone they see instead of just to the people they think deserve it.
And that's tricky given the ideological divides, the political divides, the racial divides, the
Mhm.
religious divides, not just in your country, everywhere. I mean, it's really
Mhm.
becoming, generalized that we're back in these us versus them camps,
Mhm.
and they are by design getting worse. So, do you think that in all cases, empathy should be involved in every conversation?
Well, I'll just say this. For me, it is. But here's how, especially when we think about ideological divides. Me trying to understand and be empathetic to you just means I know, and I know that you know this for sure. I don't have to agree with what you're saying. I just need to understand that whatever you think, feel, or believe, it makes total sense to you. And if I understand the position from which you're coming, now I can make better decisions. I might still decide that I want to be a fervent activist against your cause. But can't I be against your cause in more effective ways if I understand you better? And narcissists and people with nefarious intentions, they understand this very well. It's well-meaning people who are like, no, empathy. Why would I do that? This person's so horrible. And it's like, it's another tool in your toolkit to be more effective with human beings. And so this idea to be against it is just very, it's all just very interesting to me, even though I'm a baby in the topic, I think.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt a great conversation. I just want to draw attention to the fact that there are over 120 equally awesome conversations of my podcast and YouTube series on my channel. Please subscribe. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play.
I wonder how your research or the work that you've been doing around empathy or in leadership and in organizational culture, how it's actually, I'm projecting, I'm assuming it has, but maybe it hasn't, but how has it changed your behavior, your way of being in the world, your relationships? Have you noticed anything that you're doing differently?
Oh my gosh. I mean, how long is the list? Um, when I get ready to say, oh my God, I just cannot understand how a person would do X, it's like these little antennas go up and go, okay, just pause. Think about what has happened to them instead of what is wrong with them. And so when you think about even ideological divides, if I lived in an area where I had no or little to no exposure to certain types of people, if I've been taught to believe in scarcity instead of abundance, if I have a perspective that money over people, there are certain ways I will behave, certain legislation I will support. And that makes total sense to me. And I remember before where I just would, I don't want to hear it. Like, I do not want to hear anything that you have to say if your logic is, if I thought it was didn't make sense. Like if I thought the logic was broken. But now I can listen to people, hear them, be curious. And I'm not making space for hatefulness, because some people believe that that's what I'm doing. And I'm like, I'm not giving hatefulness a microphone. In fact, if I understand hatefulness better, I take the microphone. And that's the thing. And I know that for sure is different about me. I do believe that now on my own team, whenever someone is not performing, before, that used to be the quickest decision I could ever make. In fact, I used to say, when should you fire someone? The moment you think of it. Like, if I am thinking about you at night, then I'm like, you got to get out of here. And now it's more, let me make sure I'm being clear. Let me ask questions to make sure you understand. Let me find out what, in fact, I don't have to find out what else is going on with you. I've been talking to you about your life in ways that I kind of already know what's going on with you. So that now, by the time it is, I have to make a decision about severing a relationship with the person, they're not surprised. I'm not feeling guilty. They probably would have quit if they had that kind of courage. And it feels good. It's not like not good in that I'm happy I have to fire somebody, but good in that no one is surprised.
Mm-hmm.
No one is surprised because we've had lots of conversation. Everybody's very clear and we just couldn't work it out.
I'd love to talk to you about the title. So let's talk a little bit more about your book. I'd love to know what you want people to get out of it. I'd love to hear about the title. And I'd love to hear if there's anything, even if you just like scroll through the pages, just to remind yourself of the different ideas, if there's anything that you want to bring forth in our conversation from your book.
Yeah, so I live in the United States, right in the heart of the nation in Kansas City, Missouri, on the Kansas-Missouri line. And I had this ridiculous idea that Kansas City, as the heart of the nation, can be the spark of empathy throughout the rest of the country. And yeah, and I mentioned that to my publisher, and they came up with the title Spark the Heart. And we were talking about spark plugs and how spark plugs work in cars. And I don't know, I feel that with everything I have. Now, I was a little concerned about the title Spark the Heart because I know how people think about empathy. They think it means being nice. They think it is some kind of fuzzy wuzzy thing that is not directly tied to business, which is how we got to the subtitle. How can we engineer empathy in your organization? And the thing that I think, if I might just take a shameless plug here, that I did
Absolutely.
was I think that I tell stories about how I got it wrong. I very clear, look, this is what I did in this time, and this is how it shows up today. Like this is a book about my experiences as an executive coach, as a national like professional development provider with leaders, saying, look, this is how I'm a testament of what wrong looks like. This is someone who does it well. And here's what I've unpacked from them. And in the end, there's a 14 days worth of exercises, the first 7 reflective exercises and the next 7 actual practices that people can do that if they do them regularly will build empathy in their lives. Mm-hmm. And so one example of this is I talk about how when someone wanted to spend time with me, they would say, we haven't spent any time together. Well, as an engineer, we're very precise about language. Yes, we did spend time together, and we know the date and the time and how much time. But I share, like my personal therapist said, listen for understanding instead of accuracy. Mm. Well, those of us in law and the sciences, we listen for accuracy, not for understanding. But people are not problems to be solved. We have been trained as problem solvers instead of humans necessarily. And so my personal therapist says that as we listen for understanding instead of accuracy, we can recognize that a person is saying they just want to spend more time with us. And
we hear that from our kids too, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I wish I could tell people that it's easy. It's hard in that you do have to think about it. But if you think about it enough, eventually it starts to be, it becomes a practice. One of the titles that didn't make it, we thought about calling it the empathy muscle. Mm-hmm. That you can build empathy just like you build muscle in the gym. And yeah, I just think I'm a testament to what can be, how that can be. Because my first thought sometimes is still very much logic, reasonable, objective. But my very next thought is, what's the impact on the people, the places, and the things impacted?
That little shift can really make the difference and can make it a much more harmonious and psychologically safe place to work. I have a last question for you, Nicole. I've totally loved this conversation, and just thank you so much for putting out this work. I mean, I love doing these interviews with empathy authors and people working in the empathy space, because you very rarely run across somebody who's a jerk. At least that's been my experience in 100 plus interviews. I like to end the conversation by asking my guests if they can remember a time when they were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for them. If you have any stories that come to mind.
I while I was writing the book, I had another one of those universe experiences that help you be a little more empathetic. I found out at 45 years old that my father was not my father. And it was one of the most disruptive experiences I've ever had. And I tend to just keep pushing past, and so I'm pushing down emotions, trying to stay in my head. I'm working on that, right? I'm working on that. I'm trying to heal from that practice. But in the moment, I was just in my head, not dealing with the feelings at all. And then eventually my hair started to fall out. I was having a hard time focusing because I was obsessing over trying to figure out who was my father and where was he. And I had two people in my life in particular who just expressed what I likely was feeling, shared that they couldn't understand because they can't even imagine something like that happening to them. And they listened to me when I called and never once invalidated my feelings. And it was just another testament to how sometimes all it takes to be more empathetic is to listen without judgment. And it's not that I wanted them to do anything. They couldn't. But just listening gave me a safe enough place to land, to be able to come out from that on the other side in a way that I think was healthy and whole. And you know this. We are such terrible listeners. And if leaders just did one thing and said, instead of listening to respond, I'm going to listen to try to understand the person who's talking to me in this moment. And I might even ask them, what do you need from me? Before just offering up my own solution. I think that would help us go a long way.
That is a beautiful way to end our conversation, Dr. Price. This episode is only going to come out in the summer, but it's the tail end of February, so I want to wish you happy Black History Month. Thanks for making the time to meet with me up north in Montreal and the center of USA, Kansas. Let's hold up your book one more time to let people see what a gorgeous cover it is before they go order it online. Spark the Heart, Engineering Empathy in Your Organizations. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for watching and listening. We will see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thanks so much for watching another episode of Purposeful Empathy. Please subscribe to my channel. Please consider buying a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Remember, the world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play.